Welcome to a great new episode of the Austin Forum Upload. I'm Jay Boisseau, the Executive Director of the Austin Forum on Technology and Society. And I'm here with my Tech Director, John Lockman. Say hi, John.
Hey, how's it going today?
And we are pleased to have Eric Suma of Dell Technologies and also on the Austin Forum Advisory Board joining us today. Thanks for joining us, Eric.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
So today's topic is inspired by pop culture recent events, namely The Last of Us being the newest prestige TV series on HBO Max. But this time, rather than based on books like Game of Thrones, it's based on a video game. So in today's episode, we're going to talk more generally about how gaming has influenced movies and TV in the past, and how and why it is doing so differently in the present. But first, I just want to ask, are you two both watching the TV show?
I just started. I'm not 100% caught up, but I'm 3 or 4 episodes in.
Eric, you're probably all caught up, I bet.
All caught up, yes.
And you've both played the game, I bet, too.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Both of them. Did you play part 1 and 2?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah, I think asking Eric if he's played a video game is kind of rhetorical at this point. Eric, Eric, why don't you share with our listeners just a real quick bit about what you do at Dell and your interest and experience in gaming?
Yeah. So thanks, Jay. So I'm an experienced designer at Dell Technologies. I work in the R&D innovation studio. And one of the things that we've noticed about video games is that typically the things that become ubiquitous and generally consumed by people, most of that stuff has its impetus in video games. And so I absolutely love video games, even if it didn't involve my job. But I think there's a lot of really interesting nuggets there that I can carry into the work that I do.
Great. And John, you're a longtime gamer too, right?
Yeah, just a longtime nerd and gamer. From the days of Atari to now. I mean, we're still here. We're still playing. I just got my PSVR 2 set up and started playing my Horizon VR, Gran Turismo 7. I mean, it's life of gaming has changed a lot from moving blocks around and just playing simple puzzles. Yeah. Now we play simple puzzles in really high definition.
Well, and we also the games these days have stories, but we're going to get into that right now, in fact. So let's start with The Last of Us, since it's the pop culture phenomenon. It has arguably become the first game to produce a highly rated TV series. Is that true?
I'll say in my definition, it might be the second one, and the first one being The Witcher series on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
And
I wasn't sure if that was highly rated. I liked it, but
it was popular.
I mean, the first season was great. I'll say that.
That's a good point. So The Witcher was a TV series that was brought to TV just a few years ago, and The Last of Us is being brought now. I'd like you to share with our listeners a little bit about why, in some ways, this is so surprising. Like, the size of the video game market it's extraordinary, right?
Yeah, let me drop some truth bombs on you, Jay. So the video game industry is roughly 5 times the size of the movie industry. And when we're talking about 2023, we're talking about an anticipated $365 billion. And to put that into context, when you're like, wow, that is just so much bigger than the movie industry. Let's take a movie like Thor: Love and Thunder, right? The annual budget for that movie was $250 million, right? And that was like roughly a 2-hour film. When you look at Red Dead Redemption, the budget was roughly $370 million to $540 million. And they made twice that amount in their first week, right? Once that game got released.
It also took them like 10 years to produce, though.
Well,
that's why, a good point.
That's why it costs more, but that's interesting that it actually costs
Yeah,
more than Thor: Love and Thunder, but also made substantially more money.
right.
That's amazing.
Right. When you look at bang for your buck, right? Love and Thunder, that was a 2-hour film. When you look at Red Dead Redemption 2, that takes you roughly 55 hours to complete the main story. But if you really want to appreciate the entire, all of the game missions, all the unlockables, that's 177 hours to get to 100% completion.
And that's if you
Um,
play it well, not like me, right?
right. Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
and really that goes to show you kind of the scope of what we're talking about here. Modern games have amazing story, incredible attention to detail, graphics, real-time physics, all of that stuff costs time and money. And it really shows when they put time and attention into these games.
So Eric, you hit on several points that I wanted to make right there that for our listeners, and that's that modern electronic video gaming is story driven. It uses real-time physics and ray tracing. It uses advanced techniques to not only to have a better story and to be more compelling. So I think all of our listeners are probably familiar with, Donkey Kong and games like that of the past, and Pac-Man, and sort of objective based games. You're trying to get a high score. You're trying to get to the end of a maze or something. But the new generation of video games is much more story oriented, right? With writers and directors.
Yeah, exactly. So if we use Super Mario Brothers, a game that everyone's played, it has a very simple goal, right? You're always running to the right, and you're trying to rescue the princess, right? And back in the day when games first started, everything that was, a couple of engineers were responsible for every single aspect of that game, right? And the graphical fidelity didn't really lend itself to really flushing out a story. So there was a lot of ambiguity as you were playing, and it was more like the comparison between art and design. So like there was so much ambiguity that gamers were left to their own devices and imaginations to try and imagine, like, well, what are these little Goomba things? Like, why why did this like mutant turtle thing steal the princess? Like you kind of invented your own stories at that point, just because it was just not possible, right?
Right. So
Go ahead.
so we've had video game movies in the past, and the video game industry's been large for a long time. But I'm guessing the reason most of the past movies based on games have, let's say, not been good by and large is because the games themselves didn't have great stories to start with. And probably that's probably the major reason. And then I'm guessing the secondary reason may have been the ability to render some things and whatnot, although we've had good computer graphics for a while now, I'd say.
I think you're right there. The early adaptions of, game to TV, games to movie, it was like, well, hey, there's a game and that's a storyboard. Let's roll with it. Kind of, as Eric was, alluding to, in Super Mario, we didn't really know where Goombas were from or why they existed or why your friend was a mushroom. Like what's going on in this world? You just made it up. But that kind of gave filmmakers the freedom to just say, well, let's that game was pretty popular. Let's just put that image in here and we'll make up a story. And that usually didn't work.
Yeah. So this is supposed to be a fun episode today before we get back into our usual topics like AI and things like that. What were your favorite early movies made out of video games? Which video games spawned movies that you think didn't suck 10, 20 years ago?
I think back
silence.
in the day, I think back in the day, I just loved being able to see those same games that I played in a different medium and format.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely loved the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I remember going to every single one of those in the movie theater. I mean, that was a cartoon. It was also an arcade game at the time. I mean, I loved going to see all of them, even if they were bad. I felt like somewhat obligated to go and root for the root for the games that I really loved playing in the movie theater, even if they were terrible.
John, what about you?
Resident Evil at least turned into a nice line of horror films and games altogether, and VR experiences. So I mean that's fun. Rampage was an awful adaptation, but The Rock was in it.
Right.
I saw that.
Yeah, not even The Rock could save that movie, which is just really sad. The terrible adaptations go on and on, right? You got Hitman, the original Tomb Raider series, Warcraft, Assassin's Creed, yeah, and as John mentioned, Resident Evil, Need for Speed, Mortal Kombat, Wing Commander, and etc.
There was a Doom. There was a Doom film.
Doom, right?
Yeah.
The Rock was also in that.
Well, to be fair, he's the new Michael Caine. He's in all movies now.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So I mean, Mortal Kombat was so successful they did it twice.
And you know what? I actually like that one. I thought Mortal Kombat. I mean, was it a great film? No, but I thought it was a reasonably good effort of taking a video game to film. I'd go all the way back though to me. I remember Tron, the original Tron 1, and I actually thought that was a good film, possibly better than the game.
Well, and back to the crossover of the mediums at Tron 2, the only thing that was good out of that was the soundtrack.
Soundtrack was great for that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong with Daft Punk.
That's right. We need them to get back together. I think that's the appropriate way to end the pandemic formally, is for Daft Punk to get back together and put out a new album. But we digress. So we've talked about how the video game industry, which even though not everybody plays video games, is still much larger than Hollywood box office and purchased music industries. We've talked about how it's evolved from objective-based games like Most Points or getting through a maze or getting through some enemies or something, to more story with directors and writers spending years perfecting this game and using better graphics techniques to make these games better. It's really kind of becoming a virtual world almost, right? I mean, games like Red Dead Redemption 2, as you mentioned, 177 hours that you could spend navigating everything in the vast world they created, and you're not stuck to a track in it. You can freely wander wherever you want.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when I think about the way that video games are constructed, and we've talked a lot about The Last of Us being a really good adaptation, and why that might be. I think that when you build a modern game, you're really building them very much the same way that you would build a movie in a lot of ways, right? They're built to be cinematic. And with The Last of Us, Naughty Dog, who's the producer of the video game, has world-class talent. They have a huge budget. They use cutting-edge technology. But none of that, would be helpful in making the game successful without an amazing story. And that the narrative that Last of Us is built on is again the exact same way that you would build out a movie plot, and filmed almost exactly the same way. And the mediums are so similar that the director of the video game and writer actually wrote and directed a few of the episodes of the TV show. And that's how you know that like those mediums are so close together that he can just hop over to a completely different medium and be super successful.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because the Last of Us is a good one that kind of follows the film tropes as a part of the game. And then you watch the episodes that they've made, and they kind of fall back and make fun of or poke at the elements of the game in the show as well. So it's such a well-played crossover between the two.
Yeah. I really like that. And as I commented to both of you earlier this week, okay, so I actually have played some of the game, but not very well, so I don't brag about it. But
you gotta put that in your backpack. Remember,
the episode important. 3 was a great expansion of something that wasn't played out nearly that much. And so that was a wonderful bit of extra storytelling in that, with Nick Offerman, and I forget the other actor's name, but that was a wonderful episode and a great story within the story. So they are building on the story of Last of Us as well.
Right, right. It was, you know, the game was very much built from the perspective of the main characters, and so you some of that relationship with Bill was inferred, like, and it could have been easily missed, right? But it
Mhm,
was in the game. I think
mhm.
this really just builds out the world and the characters in a more meaningful way. So
Right.
it's almost like an enhancement of the game where you can find more enjoyment on both, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, and it's such a good story. I mean, I like to kind of compare almost to like The Walking Dead. But The Walking Dead came out of a great comic story and was adapted okay as a film, television series. Um, I think The Last of Us takes a more believable approach to the zombie story. It gives some sort of tangible reason for it to happen. And the game gives you that sort of realism. Like you said, you're really only playing from the two main characters' point of views. You interact with other people, but the same kind of theme comes back, is that you're not really fighting the fungus or the zombies. You're really fighting humanity all the time.
I read a great comment about that where it described Walking Dead as being about the Walking Dead, the zombies. The Last of Us is about the last of us, the humans, and how they degenerate and fight each other for their survival and such. And I think that's what makes it compelling. The fungus zombies, whatever we want to call them, they don't play a huge role in all the episodes. I think episode 4, I think there was like one in it, or maybe two. Episode 5, there were scores of them, but yeah, it's been interesting to watch this. And I guess now I want to, we're the Austin Forum on Technology and Society. I'd like you each to riff a little bit on where you think gaming technology is going, and how much is gaming technology going to influence TV and video, not just the stories, the actual technology.
Right. I think I had mentioned this a few times as I've presented at the Austin Forum, but video game technology and rendering tools and engines are now being incorporated into the filmmaking process. So where one had influenced the other, where movies had influenced video games, now video games are having the opportunity to influence the way that other entertainment mediums are being filmed and produced. So what I mean by that is there is a game engine called Unreal. It's amazing real-time game engine. And instead of recording a bunch of characters in front of a green screen and then in post-production, adding in elements and backgrounds into it and having the actors kind of feel totally out of place and acting, kind of in a sterile environment, they can now use video game rendering engines to render the background and sometimes the floors and the ceilings in real time. And so what that does for the actors is they're able to act and feel like they're in the scene, they're immersed in the scene and kind of feel like they're there and kind of channel their characters in a more meaningful way. But also for the directors, they're able to see in the camera what the background looks like, how the composition looks, and then be able to make real-time changes to those things. And for an average user that's watching that, you would never ever know that it's a video game rendering that background, right? You would just assume that they were using conventional techniques. But
Right.
what this does is it actually speeds up production. It increases the quality of the compositions, and there's really no downside to kind of leveraging this video game technology for film and movies.
Yeah, it's I think The Mandalorian, I know season 3 is just coming out now, and I think that's one of the famous ones for using a gaming engine to design a lot of the scenes in that. And it seems like it's almost democratizing high-end filmmaking. So, and I don't mean the making good cameras affordable to everybody, although that's happened too, but making the computer graphics technology affordable to everybody. And gaming is what drove that level of realism to an affordable price point, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the way that the Unreal Engine is free and available to anyone that wants to use it. And there's a bunch of like packs that you can get as a casual user, or you just want to learn about it, where you can actually create an environment with a low barrier of entry, and kind of be able to experiment with this technology and eventually maybe incorporate it into mediums such as TV and movies.
Yeah. And John, you mentioned you just got the PS2 VR headset, and I confess I ordered one too, although it's sitting over on the edge of the room in a box right now. This weekend, I promise to set it up. But I'd like to get your thoughts, both your thoughts on VR. And is gaming going to drive VR? And will that help VR be an enterprise success story, an education success story, a medical training success story, and so on? I can imagine lots of uses for VR, but something's got to pay the bills to make it effective enough, lightweight enough, good enough to use for extended periods of time. And it seems like that's obviously got to be gaming, right?
I think gaming's always the first one there because it's interactive. It's you're in it. But I've seen a fair amount of films over the last couple of years that have popped up through the various film festivals that are all based in VR as well. And so I think that's where you'll really start to see that mixed medium of, am I watching a film or am I playing a game? I don't know, kind of like playing Uncharted. I don't remember when I'm supposed to pick up the remote. Am I watching this or am I playing right now? I think I see that as a big win as it gets better. I think you'll start to see VR used more heavily too as the collaborative space for building and designing. Kind of like Eric was saying of the, filming on set and having those backgrounds automatically generated. If you can physically be in the space with your co-collaborators as you're building out your scenery or you're building out your gameplay, I see that kind of taking front stage. And it might not be fully VR. It might be just augmented. Might be somewhere in between that medium. But I definitely see that as a push. But again, like I said, not just for gaming. I think for game film, for that interactive media. I don't know about a social media, dare we say, but something like that, probably.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a versatile medium for sure. I think back to kind of the gaming community. I think gamers are more interested in trying new technology, especially when the application is video games. They're definitely more open to spending more on that and trying those things out. And what that does basically pushes the entire medium forward, right? The things that you want to go and do in video games are likely way more complex, and the demands of playing a game in virtual reality are likely going to exceed what you would do in any other use case. And so it's always really interesting to see a new platform like PlayStation VR 2, where you got a bunch of people that love video games and that have a PlayStation 5, so that the amount of people that could go and purchase that is pretty high. The barrier of entry of like, oh, I just plug this USB-C thing in and it just works, really does like lower the barrier of entry for these types of things. Mm-hmm. And when we look at immersion and realism of like, hey, these video games are now getting very close to the way that movies look. The next step to that is to actually become the character, right, in that video game. Yes. And a lot of this is about like internalizing like what, like these feelings that you are, these characters that you yourself are, right? Instead of having that on a monitor or a TV, you are now that character in first person, right? And you're feeling the feelings, and those things are happening to you. It seems like that is an inevitable next step to say like, okay, like our video games look exactly like movies now. What's the next step? Well, it's for us to be that character, right?
Yeah, ultra realism. The Gran Turismo 7 in the VR is pretty impressive. you're definitely in the car. I'm considering just building a chair, getting a steering wheel. I mean, it looks amazing. It's very cool.
And I am super excited about the potential of these technologies in all kinds of positive societal ways, from training doctors to trying to understand. Let's say there's an emergency situation and a building's collapse. You might be able to take instead of looking at blueprints to try to figure out what might have happened, you could use a simulation in some kind of VR to estimate what you might be able to do to try to find survivors in that. There's a lot of possibilities here, but I'm very excited that gaming is driving these forward. Maybe you'd rather have the societal things drive it, but gaming is doing it, and it's fun. And I like what you both said, that when you watch a movie, you kind of transport yourself as if you're part of the story, or at least I do. When you play certain video games, you're absolutely part of the story, especially in a first-person shooter kind of game. But soon this will blend into a realism in which there could be both a static version of the story that you're not influencing and a dynamic version of the story that you are able to influence in your VR implementation of that story, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think, like, VR technology is really progressing, and it's definitely going in the right direction as far as, resolution and these new capacitive controllers that allow you to kind of have these natural, interactions where if I want to go and grab something in real life, I can go and grab it in VR, and it kind of those same types of grabbing motions are you can kind of use them in that environment. There is some other really interesting technology that they've been putting into more recent VR headsets, like eye tracking.
Yeah.
That is super interesting. I know, John, I'm sure you've tried it out. Like, to be able to look at something and have the system understand where you're looking and be able to react to that is super interesting. For example, there's a game that's coming out called Switchback. Jay, you'd love this. It's a horror game. So it's right up your alley.
I don't think the listeners know how scared I am of horror movies, but thank you.
Right. I learn something new every day. But anyway, this new game that's about to come out, because it has eye tracking in it. If you get too scared and you close your eyes, it will actually generate more things to come out and scare you. So it can be reactive to kind of your innate responses in a kind of a scary moment, which is also really interesting as you start to incorporate in more of these sensors, more of these ways to track your body. You can actually kind of enhance some of those games in a way that you just couldn't before.
Yeah, I think, gaming just continues to push all the, everything. It pushes the technology. It pushes our desire to want newer and crazier things, more interactive, more immersive. It's always kind of driven computing in a way too, where it's, the gaming computer is the one you want. I mean, that's the good one, right? It's got all the RAM, it's got the best processors and the best graphics accelerators. Out of that, we always tend to get really cool things. I think out of gaming, we ended up with better AI, right? We have better processors that are suited for AI because of gaming. And I think we'll continue to see things like that. I mean, little things like eye tracking, it sounds simple, like, oh, why couldn't we do that before? It was hard. Now you go into the eye doctor and you do a little eye tracking thing, and it boop, boop, boop in 20 seconds. And you've got your, a much better reading of your visibility and motion and all of that. And we didn't have that kind of technology before. So I think, gaming is in a way, another serious driver of technology. VR is just one of the many, and won't be the last.
I totally agree with you there. And eye tracking is really interesting from a gameplay perspective, but there's also some really interesting things you can do from a rendering perspective. You know, you mentioned how gaming has accelerated some of the processors and GPUs. The PlayStation VR also employs something called foveated rendering, which is basically taking advantage of the way that your eye works, where wherever you're focused, it's very detailed. And then as you go out to your periphery vision, it becomes less and less detail. And it's a completely natural thing that your eye does to help you really focus. And if you can track your eyes in a VR environment, you really only have to focus rendering on a very specific spot of where a person is looking. What's kind of interesting around how that foveated rendering works is that in these VR environments, in order to not make you sick, you have to have between 90 and 120 frames a second. And in order to render the game fast enough, there are algorithms that have to anticipate where your eye is going and not where it is. And so there's just a whole bunch of really interesting algorithms that are constantly going to make sure that that works as designed. And if it is working as designed, you turn on foveated rendering and you don't see it, it means it's working, which is also kind of interesting and funny.
I think this is some great final points there about how gaming and the desire to have more entertaining and more realistic games is driving the technology forward, as well as adopting better storytelling. So we're seeing gaming now influence the rest of society through TV and video and whatnot through the storytelling, but it's always been pushing the boundaries of some of the technologies, GPUs, displays, headsets, things like that. So gaming is good, and it's great that it's a big business because that helps drive innovation, helps drive the cost efficiency of things down as well. So very excited about that. I'm going to close with one final question. What game are you two going to play this weekend?
I'm playing Gran Turismo 7 and Moss 2 in VR.
All right, Eric.
So I also just got a PlayStation VR 2. So I'm going to be exploring all of the games that I just bought for that. So I got a kayaking game. I have that Horizon game. I also have Gran Turismo 7, which is a racing simulator game. So looking forward to exploring those.
Well, I'm going to try to catch up to you two, or at least make it to Boston and then Wyoming and the game Last of Us. So that's my weekend chore. So thank you guys for both joining today, and look forward to talking to you about gaming, computing, society, and more in future episodes. Thanks.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks for listening to the Austin Forum Upload. You can listen to additional episodes and check out a schedule of our monthly in-person events at austinforum.org. The Upload is a production of the Austin Forum on Technology and Society, a nonprofit organization here in Austin, Texas.